Welcome to New America 2045. This is where we discuss a date that should be a tipping point in American history. Researchers have concluded by 2045, America will be a majority non-white population at 50.3%, and whites will be in the minority at 49.7%. My name is Mark Miller. I'm a retired teacher and a writer. I'm not a professional journalist. You're not getting Malcolm Gladwell here or anything like that. This is only my second podcast, so if it looks like I kind of don't know what I'm doing, it's kind of like I don't know what I'm doing. But I thought this was a topic that was worth discussing past the divisive kind of conspiracy theories you hear on Fox News and some of the right media here. We're going to discuss ways that Americans, all Americans, can be included in this experience. So we're going to embrace diversity and hope that all Americans can get through this transition with dignity, respect, and grace. I want to wish everyone a happy Black History Month. But as we move into the year 2045, I want to think of something a little bit past Black History Month, in addition to Black History Month, not replacing it. And that would be a Cultural Diversity Month. That would be a month where you find somebody whose ancestral background is different from your own. Because let's face it, unless you're Native American, everyone that's here in this country, your ancestors, your family came from some other country, right? So find someone whose ancestral background is different from your own. If your ancestors were from Africa, find someone whose ancestors were from Asia. If your ancestors were from Poland, find someone whose ancestors were from Puerto Rico or Chile or South America. If your ancestors were from England, find someone whose ancestors were from Australia. And really learn about their background. Past just water cooler talk, at the office. Really try to learn about their family history, some of their traditions. Maybe invite yourself over to dinner. When you really break bread with people is when you really get to know people. So that's what I'm pushing for, a Cultural Diversity Month in addition to Black History Month. So let's see if that can happen. I don't know. In the first podcast, I gave a lot of statistics about the year 2045. So you can go back to that one. I'm probably going to do like a podcast a month. These are going to be lengthy podcasts. There's going to be a lot of information in these podcasts. A lot of statistics. So I'm going to be throwing a lot of names at you, a lot of numbers. If you want to know any copies of any of the articles where I get any of this information from, you can just email me at NewAmerica2045@gmail.com. And I will send you a copy of, or a link to the article where I got the information. So in first podcast, we talked about a lot of statistics. In this podcast, we're going to explore why people fear people of color and why people fear immigrants. And let's face it, most of the time when people are talking about immigrants, they're talking about people of color. And we're gonna see if this fear is really justified. I think you're gonna see a lot of this rhetoric take place as the election cycle goes through, as former President Trump gets back out there. We've already seen, and his rhetoric gets back out there. We've already seen a raise in hate crimes against Asians and Muslims. And it really surprised me how quick people are to hate. But apparently race is still an issue in this country, so I think it is something worth talking about. It is necessary. So is there a reason to fear immigrants, or is there nothing to fear but fear itself? There was some research done at Chapman University that surveyed Americans about immigrants and their fear of immigrants. And they found that about 30% showed some type of fear of immigrants. That's about Trump's base too, right? That's, I don't know, coincidence? I don't know. We'll see. But some of the more interesting things they said that Recent immigrants are more reluctant to assimilate than previous immigrants. 39% of people surveyed believe that. Immigrants are a drain on the economy. 36% believe that. Immigrants bring disease into the United States. 28% believe that. And one of my favorite ones, I thought this one was funny. America should build a wall on the border of Mexico. 36% believe that should happen. So it seems like there is still some fear of immigrants and fear of people of color out there. And let's just go through some of these and talk about them one-on-one. First of all, immigrants are going to take American jobs. They're going to lower our wages, especially hurting the poor. That's one of the arguments you always hear against immigration and people of color that are coming into the country. Well, this basically just isn't true at all. First of all, immigrants are typically attracted to growing regions, so they increase the supply and demand side of the economy. They go to places where jobs are needed. That's why they go there. These are places that are expanding employment opportunities. For example, if you have a burgeoning city that's putting up high-rises left and right, or a spreading suburb, we have construction companies putting up mini malls everywhere. You got the guys waiting on the street corner, waiting to get picked up. You know, anyone can sit out there and wait on those street corners to get picked up. You know, there's no restriction on color there. But the people that want the jobs are the people that show up on the street corners and are willing to work those jobs. So they are needed for those jobs. They go where there is a surplus of jobs. So they're not taking jobs away from anyone. You know who is taking away your jobs are the CEOs, the people that run the corporations. I think everyone by this point pretty much knows that's what happened to jobs in America, along with manufacturing, along with the rise in technology and workplace automation. Your jobs first started going overseas because your bosses figured out they could make a whole lot more money paying people overseas lower wages than they could make by paying you higher wages. So let's put the blame where the blame belongs. Can we please do that? So let's face it, these days if you want a job, you're going to get a job. I mean, people are begging people to take jobs. People are still sitting home. I don't know how much money they saved from the pandemic helicopter money that was being thrown at them, but people are still sitting at home instead of clamoring for jobs. So it is definitely an employee's market out there. And employers are begging people to take jobs. They're paying them $50 just to fill out an application. So let's put the blame where it really belongs. Immigrants never took away any American jobs. It was the corporate executives in America that made a conscious decision to send the jobs overseas. And that's where all our jobs did. That's where all our jobs went to. Another thing they say about immigrants is that they abuse the welfare state. Well, the fact is most immigrants don't have access to welfare for the first 5 years they're here. And that's with few exceptions. They're mostly determined, and that's mostly determined on a state level. And it's funded by state taxes. Illegal immigrants don't have any access at all to the welfare system except for emergency Medicaid. So poor immigrants use public benefits at a lower rate than poor native-born American citizens. And they're less likely to view welfare benefits than similar native-born Americans. They're less likely to use the welfare benefits. And when they use the welfare, the dollar value of the benefits consumed is a lot smaller. And they also make a large net contribution to Medicaid and Social Security. So basically, their contributions go straight into the system while they're working here, but they take far less out of the system on the back end. So far from draining the welfare state, immigrants are given the entitlement portion just a few more years of operation before bankruptcy. Another myth is that immigrants increase the budget deficit, that immigrants consume more in government benefits than they generate in tax revenue. Well, the truth is, immigrants in the United States have about a net zero impact on government budgets. Immigrant fertility and productivity in those people born in the United States generates a lot of tax revenue. Let's remember, for every one Latino death, there are 5 Latino births. So immigrants grow the economy considerably. A lot of immigrants come when they're young, but not young enough to be in public school for as long as the natives are. And let's consider a kid that comes to the United States at 14 years old. They don't consume hundreds of thousands of dollars in public school costs. But then they graduate at 18 and enter the workplace and start contributing to the tax revenue. So they haven't used up a lot of the public money, but then they go to work sooner than later and they start contributing to the tax revenue. So they're going to spend much more time contributing to the tax pool than they do draining it. Another myth is that immigrants don't assimilate like they used to. Well, there's a researcher and economist at the University of Washington, and he writes about what he calls ethnic attrition, and that's when immigrants and their descendants shed their identification of their country of origin, and it's through intermarriage or through time. And the more educated descendants of Hispanic immigrants fail to identify as Hispanic a lot of times. But this happens through all cultures, not just Hispanics. Well, this guy, Victor, his name was, his research showed that rapid and continual assimilation over the generations that's comparable to the same immigrants that came during the Age of Migration from 1954 to 1914, when there were waves of Europeans that immigrated to the United States and Ellis Island. Well, today young people all over the world emulate American pop culture by the internet, and immigrant kids want to fit in with their peers at school. So he has shown no decrease in assimilation whatsoever. Immigrants are assimilating more smoothly than in the past, and although violence against immigrants has recently been on the rise, especially against Asians and Muslims, as we had talked about previously, today immigrants don't face the blatant racism and resistance that their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents faced. So yeah, there's still racism out there, but we don't have it half as bad as our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents had it. So all in all, it is much easier for us to assimilate. This ethnic attrition is also quickened with the second and third generation Americans that marry those from other long-settled ethnic or racial groups. So the children of these intermarriages are much less likely to identify ethnically with their immigrant ancestors, and much more likely to be economically and educationally integrated as well. So ethnic attrition is one reason that the multiracial category is steadily growing at a very, very strong pace. So even though the myth is that immigrants and people of color that come to this country don't assimilate, the fact is they really do, and the research has shown that out. But at the same time, to be honest with you, I don't think I want that much assimilation. I think everyone should hold on to a little bit of their culture from the origin of the country that they came from. That's what makes America a melting pot. That's what I really enjoyed about living in Los Angeles when I lived out there. It was the diversity in the community and how celebrated immigrants and the culture was out there, right along with our American customs. And there's nothing wrong with having tamales instead of turkey and dressing for Christmas dinner and experiencing someone else's culture. After all, we are that melting pot. And I miss being able to go to a Korean restaurant or a Mexican restaurant or an Italian or a Peruvian or a South African restaurant, right there in my community. There's not that much diversity where I live here in Northwest Florida. And I really miss that. So Hopefully there'll be more diversity as we move into the year 2045. I hope everyone doesn't just assimilate to eating hot dogs and apple pie and try to be like their neighbor. Hold on to your individuality and let's learn from each other's cultures and let's learn from each other. So diversity is a good thing. Like I said, we are a melting pot. And that's the way the New America 2045 is going. And for people, Americans that are not going to be comfortable with that, you're going to have to go back to whatever country of origin you're from where everyone looks the same as you do. And there are countries like Italy and France where you have to prove to be a French of Italian ancestry to become a citizen there, even if you're born there. America's not about that. We're about taking in all those huddled masses. And we should be about that. We should be embracing that diversity. Okay, this is one of the big ones here. Immigrants are a major source of crime. Well, there have been a number of studies on this that conclude the exact opposite. Starting off with the Cato Institute, they concluded that immigrants are less likely to be incarcerated for violent and property crimes. That cities with more immigrants and their descendants are more peaceful and have more of a sense of a generational community. And when immigrants settle in a stable environment with employment opportunities, they do well, just like the rest of us. But there's been a lot of empirical research to back up these conclusions, that immigrants are less likely to engage in crime. Studies going back all the way to the 1910 Industrial Commission, the 1911 Immigration Commission, the 1931 Wickersham Report, the 1994 U.S. Commission on Immigration, and as well as several contemporary studies. And I'm going to quote some of these studies here, just tell you what some of them said. A study published by Michael Light and Ty Miller in 2018 shows that illegal immigration is not correlated with violent crime rates. And the state of Texas actually recorded arrests and convictions in 2015. Out of 1,794 convictions of natives, or there were 1,794 convictions of natives for every 100,000 natives. There were only 782 convictions of illegal immigrants for every 100,000 illegal immigrants, and only 262 convictions of legal immigrants for every 100,000 legal immigrants. So with very few exceptions, immigrants are less crime prone than natives, and they had no effect on crime rates. Here's some other studies. Butcher and Peel examined the incarceration rates of men aged 18 to 14 in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000 censuses. And in each year, immigrants are less likely to be incarcerated than natives, with the gap widening in each decade. By 2000, immigrants have incarceration rates that are 1/5 of those of native-born Americans. The same pair wrote another paper and it focused on immigrant incarceration in California. They looked at both property and violent crimes by city. Between the years 2000 and 2005, California cities with large inflows of recent immigrants tended to have lower violent crime rates. And during the same time period, there was no statistically significant relationship between immigration and property crime. In a separate study, Ewing, Martinez, and Robeau, that's R-U-M-B-A-U-T, well, they summed it up like this. Roughly 1.6% of immigrant males 18 to 39 are incarcerated compared to 3.3% of native-born males. This disparity in incarceration rates has existed for decades, as evidenced by data from 1980, 1990, and the 2000 census. In each of those years, the incarceration rates of native-borns were anywhere from 2 to 5 times higher than that of immigrants. Here's some more census data. According to the 2010 census, 10.7% of native-born men between the ages of 18 and 39 without a high school degree were incarcerated, compared to only 2.8% of Mexican immigrants and only 1.7% of Guatemalan and Salvadorian immigrants. Here's some more research for you. Aussie and Cuban, they looked at 159 cities at 3 dates between 1980 and 2000 and found that crime rates and levels of immigration were not correlated at all. This guy named Martinez looked at 111 U.S. cities with at least 5,000 Hispanics and found no statistically significant findings. So there's a trend here. Another researcher named Reed looked at a sample of 150 metropolitan areas and found that levels of recent immigration had no effect on property crime rates. They wrote, it appears that anti-immigrant sentiments that view immigrants as crime-prone are not only inaccurate at micro levels, they are also inaccurate at the macro level. Furthermore, there have been a number of studies that concluded that the high immigration rate of the 1990s significantly contributed to the precipitous crime decline of the 1990s. Remember when the crime rate went down? That's because there was more immigration, not less. When immigrants move into an area, immigrants are less crime prone and have positive spillover effects like aiding in the community redevelopment, rebuilding the local civil society, and rebuilding formerly decaying urban areas. They contributed to the economic prosperity, and they basically just move in and they start building a community. Another big myth out there is that immigrants are a big cause or reason for terrorism in this country. Well, the Center for Strategic and International Studies analyzed 893 terrorist attacks and plots between 1994 and 2020. And they found that right-wing attacks and plots far outpace those inspired by Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, or far-left networks. So the number of attacks had grown significantly during the last 6-year period. Nearly 2/3 of the attacks and plots in 2019 and over 90% between January and May of 2020 were perpetrated by right-wing extremists. That's hard to say, right-wing extremists, but that very right conservative part of our political parties. Now, that doesn't even count the numerous school shootings that we see that have been perpetrated in our schools. And that's just the truth. So regardless of what our former president had to say or Fox News, we're going to see a lot more of that type of rhetoric, a lot more of that type of fear-mongering coming up as the elections start coming up. And I hate to predict this, but I think we're going to see a lot more of that type of acrimony coming up as the elections come up. I hope we don't. But I think the immigrants are the ones who really need to be fearful in this case in the next few months that are coming up. Last but not least, one of the biggest misnomers is that it's easy to immigrate to America. And we're the most open country in the world. It's so easy to come and immigrate to the United States of America. Well, the truth of the matter is it's pretty difficult. First of all, you have to become a permanent resident for 5 years. That's known as getting a green card. And it can take only 3 years, but you have to be sponsored by a spouse. So you hear people getting married for a green card. That can take 3 years. Or there are 4 other ways it can happen. You can get a student visa. You can get on a temporary work visa. You have to be sponsored by your employer. You can apply for asylum, but, good luck with that. You're dealing with multiple government agencies, and we all see the backup at the border. Or you can just pay your way in. If you invest $500,000, you can get a government-approved regional improvement project, and you can just move right on in. But if you don't have $500,000 and you don't get married, it'll take 5 years after being here with that green card. So after 5 years, you fill out an application and you set up an appointment for an exam and an interview. And that takes place in another 8 to 12 months, so that's another year. So that's 2 years so far after the application. And after you pass that test and then interview, that's going to take about another year for you to be interviewed. That's 3 years after you've gotten your green card, after you've been here for 5. So that's 3 years after you've been here for 5 years. So that's a total of 8 years. That's the least amount of time it can be done. If everything goes smoothly, it's a total of 8 years. From everything I've read on the process, it takes a lot longer than that. It takes much longer, 10, 15, even 20 years for this process to take place from the time you get your green card, from the time you're taking that oath and pledging your citizenship as a United States citizen. So I don't understand why it takes so long. I don't understand why it has to be so hard. Honestly, I think you can streamline the process. If you're here, if you can document that you've been working here in the United States for 2 years and you don't have a criminal record, then you should be given citizenship. So, even though it's true that America allows greater numbers of immigrants than any other country, the fact is the annual flow of immigrants as a percent of our population is below most other countries because the United States has such a large population. The percentage of our population that is foreign born is about 13.5%, and that's below historical highs. So even though America is great at assimilating our immigrants, other countries are much more open to legal immigration. So I hope we dispelled some of those myths for you. As you can see, there is nothing to fear but fear itself when it comes to immigrants and immigration of people of color. Please don't forget to do what you know you need to do. Subscribe. I'm here on Facebook. I just opened up a TikTok channel. So I got a couple things on there. You can check out what I got to say on TikTok as well. And if you want to check out one of my books, I'm on Facebook at Mark Miller Books. You can pick them up on Amazon. You can email me at NewAmerica2045@gmail.com. And I hope you please always remember and never forget that when you're good to each other, you're really good to yourself. We'll see you next time on New America 2045. Peace out.